Boy, oh boy. Let's get into this. Pastor Eric Mason, Mace, Mace, known by a lot of people outside of his church, but he declared on his social media that he was stepping down from Epiphany Fellowship Church, a church he planted in 2006, if I'm not mistaken. And over 20 years of ministry in Philadelphia, he's stepping down. I want to talk about it. I want to ask if you're seeing what I'm seeing. First things first, welcome to CNN. I'm your host, Kirk Kennedy, the underdog. Let's go in. On this channel, we take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. All right. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Now, I got to say this. I don't know a lot of the details of what's happening with Eric Mason, right? I know who he is. I know that he's stepping down. He said this on his social media, that he's stepping down from Epiphany Fellowship Church that he planted in 2006. I remember when this church was planted because I was there in Philly. There was a big event. It was like a street event outdoor. The who's who of Christian rap was there at the time. I was an up-and-coming Christian rap artist named Voice. But I mean, and that was when Philadelphia was sort of the mecca of Christian hip-hop. Not that it was the only place. You had people in the West Coast and just like secular rap, but there was a point where secular hip-hop was New York, was it. And then it sort of moved to the West Coast and then kind of moved back and then kind of went to Atlanta and then the Midwest and then, so it's all over. But at that time, the Christian hip-hop mecca, was Philadelphia because of like groups like Cross Movement and so forth. So there was a big event. It was live performances. It was almost like a big neighborhood block party when Epiphany Fellowship planted. I didn't know who Eric Mason was. I was just there at that event. Our Cross Movement was there. Truth was there. Flame was there. I think me and Flame hung out a lot during that time. Shy was there, I believe. It was just a who's who. And it was just a cool event. It was cool to see that happen. Eventually, ambassador of Cross Movement would go on to be an elder there and serve. And then circumstances happened where he left the church some years ago. And so Eric Mason was the lead pastor, but he sort of became a polarizing figure, if we're being honest, during the whole, what I would call the woke versus anti-woke phase of the evangelical church. And he was one of the leading Black voices, along with like the B.D. Anyabwile and a few others that were pushing back against narratives and all of that. So he became a sort of a polarizing figure through a lot of that stuff. But he also became someone that people really looked to and so forth. But he had a lot of things going on. His wife had some health issues over the years. He has some. In fact, in his particular post, which we're going to read in a second, he'll acknowledge some of those health issues that he would say. So I just remember being around, and I've known of Mason. I know him. I went to his church when they created they did an album called Doxa when they were Acts 29, and it was me and my buddy Juan from my church. He's on the leadership team in my church. We went there for the live recording, and actually every Sunday morning when I'm tweaking my message, it's standard for me to put that Doxa album on. I just have it on in the background while I'm tweaking my message. So it was there. So I saw this Facebook post. Actually, a friend of mine sent it to me, and he sent it to me because I've been a pastor for 18 years at my church, so just a little shorter than Mace. I was still a Christian rap artist when he planted primarily. I still got bars, though. I'm getting ready to drop a project soon. Don't let the chubby face fool you. I rap, right? That's a different conversation. So a buddy of mine sent this because he knows I've been going through a very challenging year. The last 5 years have been challenging. Someone on my Facebook post said any pastor who pastored during COVID deserves a pat on the back. And I think there's some truth to that on some level. But he sent it to me and I was like, wow. And there were some things that Eric Mason said that I resonated with. But I will say this, in the age of pastor scandals, I'm talking about media reports, like this pastor stepping down for this, financial, sexual, hiding sexual offenders in the church. I feel like I cannot open my Facebook feed and there not be multiple articles within my feed of some scandal with them pastors. It was at least refreshing. I don't know what happened at his church. I did call some people that I know, and I'm not going to get into what I was told, but it was refreshing to hear directly from him that he was just stepping down. Things have been challenging. It wasn't like an article of a scandal. Again, I don't know what happened there, but when I saw this the other day, I resonated with some things, but then I was also like, man. And then there was someone who was a member of his Facebook, of his church, who I follow. We follow each other on Facebook. I think he watches the stream from time to time. I won't say his name, but he posted this on his page yesterday. And it said that it was at Epiphany Fellowship, and it said, Christ's church is built on the rock. We will persevere. And so and then I read the comments, a few comments, and I was like, oh, okay. So it may be some challenging. And I think anytime a lead pastor steps down, unless there was a formulated process, this seems like it may have been coming, but sudden, the way that is coming about. But I want to talk a little bit about it, not to try to give details and figure out like what happened and what's the Jew. I don't like doing that stuff. That's not, if it comes out, it comes out and we'll hear about it. I want to give a few other thoughts. I want to talk about this differently from a different perspective. Let's read what he said, what he actually said. So this is an article written by Christian News. And I'm going to read his actual Facebook. This is on, I think, his Instagram, feed. I think this was Instagram, where he says this year has been the hardest year of my life. I've been on medical leave for my mental health. I'm still healing and recovering, but some changes are on the way. We have loved the 20 plus years we've been in Philly. Yahweh has done much and we are grateful. However, our season in Philly has come to a close. So no, he didn't say ministry has come to a close. He said our season in Philly, I imagine he means his family and whoever else may be, is coming to a close, has come to a close. These have been some of the most impactful times of our lives, and we are grateful to Epiphany Fellowship for everything. Our hope is that you will continue to grow and flourish for many years to come. Pray for us as we enter this new season. Pray also for my continued healing and peace, remembering I'm Yahweh's son first, a husband, a father, and minister of the gospel, that order. We will send updates as they come. We love you all, and so forth. That's a tough thing. I say to my church often, and I pray this to the Lord often, you don't need me. I tell my church, the Lord does not need me. My church is probably slightly smaller than his, from what I understand, or roughly the same size. But I tell my church all the time, you don't need me. The Lord doesn't need me. And I tell the Lord, you don't need me. I pray, Lord, if I'm in the way in any way, please send someone else. Just allow me to provide for my sons, my 3 boys. I'll get out the way as long as I can provide for them. That's all I don't even, but the Lord seems to be keeping me at the church. And I don't say that as a bad thing, but I have gone through a very difficult season. So I resonated with his words. Now I will say this again, because I don't want anyone watching this who may have been offended or hurt by him. I don't know. It seems like this was, so I'm not in here. I'm not choosing any sides or saying this and that, but I do want to give some observations just about church ministry and what's happened over the last few years and how I've seen the enemy work in a lot of ways. But I'm in no way making comments that if anyone was hurt, and this is like when you watch a movie, this is a fictional story. Any events that are specific were just by chance. I'm not in any way saying anything, but I'm going to speak from a pastor perspective and talk about what I've just seen over the last few years in the church. And so I just had a few thoughts. I want to start with what Marxism did to leadership in general, but especially in the church. So I'm going to give a brief historical lesson. Those of you who watch me know I've stayed focused. I walk through these things. All right. So around 2013 is when the Trayvon Martin killing by George Zimmerman down in Florida really kind of hit the church. I mean, people knew about it, but it really hit the church. And actually, let me back up. In 2012, or was it 2011? I think it's 2012, if I'm not mistaken, or 2011. Propaganda, Christian hip hop artist, then Propaganda, who was on Humble Beast, if I'm not mistaken, released an album with a song called Precious Puritans. And he was basically taking a jab at the white evangelical church for not understanding that Puritans who owned slaves was challenging for Black people who were in those churches. You know, it's a lot of the race relations in the church. This is not what this video is about. So I'm just giving you some brief background context. But a lot of the race relations in the church, often in America at least, are Black people willing to go to predominantly white churches for the theology. And usually it's not the other way around, right? It's not, you don't see white people flocking to Black churches and all of that. So there was a sense where I think Propaganda felt like he needed to just share what it's like to be a Black person and hear you read from Puritans who owned slaves. That was a big deal. And in 2013, for whatever reason, a lot of the bigger name evangelical leaders, people who wrote for Gospel Coalition, different people, not wrote for them, but it was just, a lot of stuff was going on that blog back then, the Gospel Coalition blog. Those of you that were around and remember. And there was a lot of pushback against that. And the Beatty was one of the few Black authors on that blog. He was trying to explain what propaganda meant, but to no avail. I was watching it play out. Tabidi was a good friend of mine around that time. We used to talk about it. I knew the guys who were the white evangelical leaders. I knew Owen Strand and a bunch of these guys. I mean, I've known these guys for years. I was watching them go head to head, and I was like, wow, they just don't understand. And then 2014, Mike Brown happens. And that blew things up. But once that happened, and there was this idea where we need to talk about racism in the church, which I think Propaganda's song added to that. I think for Black evangelicals who were in those spaces, they felt like a lack of compassion about the Trayvon shooting was problematic. And then the Mike Brown thing, initially before, when it first came out, hands up, don't shoot, that was a big deal. And there was a big, it seemed subtle, but I've been watching it grow in the background. I was in the background and a lot of these things. I knew a lot of the major players in some of these things. And I watched this kind of blow up in the church. And it became this thing where if you don't support Black Lives Matter, right? Some of the organization, but for many it was the hashtag, right? If you don't support that, you're a white supremacist and you support that. And then the flip side was the conservative side, and white evangelicals pushed back with, well, first it was, well, you're a cultural Marxist, right? And then they had guys like Vodi Bakum, and that's where Candace Owens really shined. She became, oh, listen to her, she's Black and she doesn't agree with y'all. So it was just this subtle civil war that became a big deal. And this idea of, first you were a cultural Marxist, right? Then you were a social justice warrior. If you agreed that there was racism in the church. I remember in 2018, when John MacArthur wrote, with a bunch of other guys, signed the statement against social justice, right? It was this big deal within the church. It was really crazy because, and if you saw my last video, you would see I didn't understand it. I knew why people thought the way they thought, but I didn't understand it because I thought, look, we're the body of Christ. If someone wants to focus on racism, that's their part of the body. Let them do it. If you want to focus on abortion, then do it. If you want to focus on, I didn't know what the problem was. No one was sinning by focusing on it, but it became, if you bring this up or if you don't agree with this as a major problem. I watched so many relationships just get torn apart and the enemy was just sitting there eating popcorn. And so I had this thing called stay balanced, right? And I developed this term called theolitical because people were they were hiding behind their political lenses and seemingly becoming more allegiant to that than their own faith in Christ. Here's what I mean about Marxism to leadership. So the Marxism perspective was, there was sort of two groups of people. I think it was the bourgeois, and then I forgot the other name right now. But the people who have the rich take advantage of the poor, right? And so everything came from the perspective of the downtrodden, the poor, and you You got to push. And it was like, hey, these people own businesses, but these people want to work hard, but they make all the money. And it was it was a crazy critique. There were things that were true about what Marxists said in terms of just observation. I mean, even Jesus said the scriptures say the rich abuse the poor and things like that, right? And it warns against that. But his conclusions were horrible. His conclusions, he wasn't a believer, so his conclusions were horrible. But what happened in the church was it became the people who are in leadership of the church, leadership, are the ones who are the rich in Marxism's eyes, and the people who aren't are the poor. And it was really interesting how this played out. And within this time, what grew was the reality of church hurt. So you had like the Me Too movement that was vibrant for a little bit, which I think in some senses, women got their due. Women were treated harshly, unfairly, were exploited sexually through entertainment and stuff, and people got their due. Women got their due. Men like Harvey Weinstein got locked up. Matt Lauer was fired from Good Morning America. I'm shooting from the hip here, right? This is me. I just shoot from the hip. So if I get details wrong, I'm sorry, but I'm remembering these things from the hip. That was a big movement, and I understood why it happened. But from that movement came #BelieveAllWomen. That's just cap. You can't do that. You can't believe. Let God be true and every man a lie. Man doesn't mean man; it just means mankind, humanity. Women lie too, right? So, but there was a lot of stuff that was coming out of that. Well, what happened was church hurt grew dramatically during this time because now we're in 2018, 2019. Then COVID hits, right? And COVID just crushed all of us. And the whole time the enemy's just doing this. There's a lot of insults, a lot of relationships being torn apart simply because we disagree on how important racism is in the church. I'm just talking about the church. I'm not talking about the world. There was a whole other thing, the politics of that. But it infiltrated the church in these ways. I think the conversations were good and necessary to have, but they took a life of their own, which was very sinful, that I think the enemy just enjoyed that thoroughly. But in that church hurt, you had a bunch of people deconstructing their faith. In fact, Jerome Gay, a friend of mine, was just on the Perry's podcast the other day, and he talked a little bit about church hurt. And I was with Jerome last fall, and we talked about this a lot because he's written some books on it and stuff like that, and we were talking through it. But what you saw was this rise of church hurt. But with the Marxist lens, church hurt was top down only. Like if you're in a position of authority, then you're the one making decisions. So you're not the one that gets hurt, right? You're not hurt. It's the people who are underneath you that are the ones hurt. And so church hurt became this major issue, but it was just really one-sided. It was just from the top down is what church hurt was. There was no other way about it. So if you say, well, I'm hurt too, it's like, oh yeah, but you're a pastor though. You get to make all the decisions, or that's what happened. And the Marxism lens gave a negative view of the people who are on top, right? On top. So what happened was when you get to COVID and you go through COVID was, what COVID was. You lived through it. It was incredible. It was the most testing I can say I've seen in my lifetime in the church context. Obviously, there were other parts of human history that were way worse, depending on who you were. COVID was a challenge. And there was a point where with the church hurt, with the Me Too movement, with the Marxism stuff, pastors became public enemy number one in many ways. And what happened was, if you were a pastor, all of a sudden you had to also be a race relations expert. You had to be an epidemiologist. You had to give sermons on, should we take the jab? Remember when the vaccine was called the jab? Remember that? Telling you to take the jab and all. You had to weigh in on everything. And if you were wrong on anything, people were offended, right? At you. And sometimes you didn't even know it. And because I'm a pastor and I have been for 18 years, I have friends with pastors, and I was talking to pastors during that time because we were all going through it. We all felt it. And it was almost like I knew pastors who were afraid to go to their churches on Sunday and have an opinion about anything because they were afraid people would get offended and leave, right? And during that time, a lot of churches weren't gathering together, so you don't know who's a part of what. It was a very, very challenging time for all of us, but it was challenging to be a pastor during that time. A guy like Eric Mason was a lightning rod for the race stuff. He was out there. I would see him on social media. Sometimes I just said, man, he's wilding right now. And I have my little stints, but I said, look, I just backed away. I didn't want to, because you know what, when it's online, if we're being honest, even when I make videos, people will comment in the comment section. If I respond, and I'm just pushing back because you disagree with me, okay, then by default, I'll probably disagree with you. People get offended. Oh, I thought you're supposed to be a pastor. Dad, fam, I know it's text, but I have to agree with you. I can't disagree. So this is what the world has become. And remember this, remember when it used to be, we agree to disagree? We could have 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we could agree to disagree. Okay, I just disagree. But then it became, oh, you hating. You a hater if you disagree. Then it became, well, you just don't understand what I'm saying. Let me explain myself again. It's like, fam, I understand what you're saying. I understand every word in the sentence you made. I understand how the noun is the verb is speaking to the noun and the adjective. I understand. I just disagree. It became that. But then it became a moral failure. If you disagree now, this is why you'll see people go to blows over who's better, MJ or LeBron. It's like, fam, what are you really fighting over? Why are you so upset? Well, it's because I disagree with your opinion so much that I'm willing to put, because and underneath that is just everyone just thinks they're right. Everyone thinks they're right. You ever had someone say, hey, I was afraid to bring this up to you because I thought you wouldn't hear me out? You ever had someone tell you that? Or they say, I didn't bring it up to you because I thought you wouldn't be on my side. You ever have anyone tell you that? Most of you have. If you're watching this, I bet you a lot of you are probably shaking your heads. Yep. You know, think about that statement. I didn't bring this up because I thought you wouldn't hear me out. Well, you know, I'm not deaf. I don't have any hearing problem. Even though I got long dreads, I get it. I can hear very well. The dreads don't block the ear canal. You don't mean you don't think I can hear you. So what do you mean by hear you out? What you mean is you think I may disagree with you and give you some pushback. And people don't want that. They don't want pushback. Or I thought you would be on my side. Well, that implies that your side is right and you don't want pushback. That's what people don't talk about. People didn't want pushback. College students couldn't even go to college and hear a conservative position because they felt like, I need safe spaces. You're doing harm to me. There was stuff like misgendering. If you say someone looks like a gender and you call them that, and that's not, they'll get offended. Like, we went from sticks and stones may break my bones and names will never hurt me to words hurt me, or just even you disagreeing with me. It just was chaos. It was chaos. And in the midst of it, here's pastors having to still try to lead churches, fight their hardest to not get pulled into the culture wars that are happening in the culture in their church. And it became very challenging. So church hurt went only one way. It didn't go down. And people don't realize this, that when people are offended and they leave the church, they tell other people what the pastor did or what they disagree. They leave the church. The pastor still has to stay there. He has to clean up the blood in aisle 3, stock the shelves, restock them, and stay open for business. Most pastors will not just be like, well, I'm leaving too. I'm just tired of it. Because we know it will have a more detrimental impact if we leave. All of this, I saw it shift dramatically. I'm not saying these things weren't there before. I get it. But I saw these things shift dramatically during the last 12, 14 years, especially as we went through COVID and coming out of it. I know many men who just gave up in ministry. Some men chose to just disqualify themselves because they were just overwhelmed. They just gave up. Some people never, I got a friend who said 40% of his church never came back. Not that they left the church. Some of them still watch online. They just don't come back to church. I personally lost good people who said, no, we love the church. We love it. I still get to, oh, thank you so much for, but they said, we don't think we have to go to church because God is everywhere. It was like, well, God was everywhere in 2019 when you was coming to church every Sunday. It didn't make sense to me. No, but nonetheless, I digress. I'm rambling too much. What it did to leadership was make pastors non-human. And anyone in leadership, you're the problem. Marxism made anyone, if you're the parent, you're the problem, right? So then you had parents who were too afraid to challenge their children because you were seen as the problem. You got all these people remembering their childhoods and stuff that parents were just trying their best. They always say there's no manual for parenting. Well, there isn't. There's no manual for children either, but you do your best. Sure, you're going to make mistakes and be flawless and sin against your parents. It's going to happen. But everyone started to see everything, their history, through the lens of this Marxism lens, which which is why I understood why conservatives were like, wokeism is dangerous. Being woke is dangerous. Because all of a sudden, everyone's just been offended and sinned against and hurt, and it's only one way. I don't know. And there's some people that this would probably true too, but most people who have been hurt in a church have hurt people in the church. But I never see people coming like, hey, can I meet with you, man? I'm struggling with church hurt. I've really hurt people in the church, and I don't know how to, I rarely do I hear that, right? So this is what Marxism did to leadership. It made leadership challenging. And this spills into the second observation, which I want to say. Again, I'm not saying Eric Mason in particular. No one, even myself, have erred and sinned against people, have been flawed and those things. I'm not saying that. But I just want to give you a taste, because I don't feel like pastors' voices get heard a lot. Let me tell you what it's like to be a pastor. This happens to me. No, I'm going to use this as an example. If anyone who said this to me is watching, I'm positive. I'm not using your name. I want to just give the context, the situation. I've had people tell me, hey, I want to ask you for forgiveness because I've been bitter at you. Right? I've been bitter at you for something that I knew you were too busy to get back, but you didn't get back to me in an email or whatever it was, right? I was bitter at you, offended at you. And this has happened to me over the years. And obviously when they say that, I'm like, absolutely, I forgive you. Of course I do. What am I going to say? No. But it used to catch me by surprise. It doesn't anymore. And I've never said this to many of these people. I just let it go. But a lot of times when people confess bitterness to me, and I've heard this happen to other pastors, they don't confess it with a lot of contrition. It almost sounds like, hey, I took one of your lollipops. I shouldn't have done it. I'm sorry. It doesn't come with that, right? So it's like, oh, I've been offended. I was offended at you. And people don't realize that bitterness, according to Hebrews 12, it says, if you are bitter, you fail to obtain the grace of God. That's what bitterness, this is God's word. Go look this up. Hebrews 12, go look at verses 15 on that. It says, bitterness is a root that defiles many, and you fail to obtain the grace of God if you're bitter. What that means is you are not going to heaven if you are a bitter person, because bitterness is just unforgiveness spelled with the letter B. God takes that seriously. He says, how many times do you hear you fail to obtain the grace of God connected to one sin, right? God said that in his word, right? And so you have something as serious as your eternal destination at stake. And so think about this for a second. You're bitter at someone. This person doesn't even know it because they didn't respond to an email that you sent 8 months ago. You're now confessing it to them. And in light of what God's word says, let's put this in real, because people do not think like what I'm about to say this to you. And if you're watching and you're one of those people, I'm not judging you, but I think it's important that you understand the reality of what you're saying. If bitterness will send you to hell, you fail to obtain the grace of God, then what you're saying is, I was willing to go to hell because you didn't respond to the text or email that I sent. And I've been holding this against you for 8 months. Thank you for confessing it. I forgive you. But fam, thank the Lord that nothing happened to you during that time and you didn't stand before him. Like, that's a serious thing. And then they never say, and I also said things to other people in that may have affected the way people view you. This is what it's like to be a pastor. You're trying to be faithful. You're flawed. You make decisions not based on individual preferences, but trying to serve everyone. Now, all pastors may not do this, so I'm just saying, this is what we try to do. Make decisions based on that, and people can say, hey, I was offended at you. I've watched this happen so much in the last 6 years. To me and my church, to others, where people will just leave, no conversation, no email, no nothing, just offended, believe something that someone said, it's slander, gossip, and they just leave and they'll send you an email telling you that. This is what it's like to be a pastor in this day and age. People can just be offended at you. You don't even know it. And they're talking to other people. And then you find out, wait a minute, when people are leaving the church or ready to leave, it's because of something you didn't even know about. And it's not even a sin issue. It's not even you sinned against them. You're not even in proximity to some of these people. It's just a preference issue. It's a judgment from a distance that people believe, and the enemy is just sitting there eating popcorn, just enjoying it. This is what it's like today, and this is what's happened to the church. The church has lost its conviction to really glorify God. The church has lost the privilege that it is. Do you know, in the grand scheme of all the people that have ever been created, that have lived and died, only a small percentage, a microcosm of humanity, will be given the designation sons of God. And by sons, I mean daughters too. We're talking about, and then within that context, a much smaller microcosm of that group will be called pastors. Like, what a privilege it is. And we've just lost it. That privilege has become presumption. So much so, we're just so convinced that we're, as if 1 Peter 4 does not say the righteous judgment begins at the household of God. For if we are scarcely saved, what will become of those who are not believers? The scripture calls us scarcely saved. It means by the hair of your chinny chin, you are saved. And you got all these Christians, you're carrying around all this animosity. And then you got pastors who are just wilding. Every time I'm just like, and I'm not judging anyone, because we're all capable. I have many flaws, but I have some faithfulness in my life too. I'm not going to pretend like it's humble to not pretend like I only stumble and fall. Yeah, I got weaknesses for sure. Some of them are obvious, but there's a lot of faithfulness too. And I think all of us should be able to be like, there's some faithfulness in my life for real, right? I think, so how does this all apply to Eric Mason? When he said, this has been the hardest year of my life, when when you're going to look for a car, right? You're looking for a ar, and all of a sudden you find a car you like, and you get that car. And after you get it, you start seeing that car everywhere. Maybe not the same color, but the model, the make and the model, you see it. I got a new car in January. Never thought I'd get a car. I loved my Honda Accord, but the Lord said it was time. And he spoke through the mechanic. The Lord spoke through the mechanic, said it was time. I got a new car. And then we started seeing that car. I never really paid attention to it, and I see it everywhere. As a pastor, I'm in a fraternity of people throughout all eternity. I'm in a fraternity throughout eternity. I told you I got bars. Wait till that album drops. Where I can understand what you mean when you say, I've had the toughest year of my life. I'm not in church because of my mental health. Now, I'll be honest, that's never been my thing. If you knew me well enough, you would know, and anyone who goes to my church, who's been there long enough, knows I've had the toughest 5 years of my life. It has been spiritual warfare for certain, but I've never been more in love with the Lord as well. For some people, suffering leads them away from Christ. For me, I didn't have that option, because I do not want to stand condemned at the end. I do not want to have to tell my church I can't be an example. I do not want my sons to be like, sons, I couldn't handle it, and now we have to leave the only church you've known because your dad. I just couldn't do it. And I'm not being arrogant at all. I am capable of being flawed. I am flawed. I'm capable of falling just like you are. But there's faithfulness to suffering. Faithfulness comes to that. I'm not judging whether Eric Mason was suffering or not, but when he said, this is the toughest year of my life, because of what I've been going through recently, I felt it. I felt it. Now, he's different than me. I'm not out there. I'm not doing some of the things he's doing. I felt it. But I think a bigger question is, as a believer, as the church, like what are we really doing right now? What are we really doing right now? Like, we're so blind to the privilege of what it means to be a Christian that we just are transgressing and not even being affected by it. We're so quick to gossip and slander and believe these things as if, I told someone recently, fam, let me ask you a question. If someone said that you were treating your wife a certain way, and it was starting to spread around the church and people believed it, and you were hearing that people were believing that you were a womanizer and treated your wife a certain way, you knew it wasn't true. Your wife knew it wasn't true. And the people closest to you knew it wasn't true. I said, would you still really want to come to the church? Would you still like come and if you heard people don't know if they want to be in your groups and be around anything you lead because they believe this about you, would you still want to come to church? And every time I ask someone that, they all say, no, I wouldn't. And then I say this, I have to check in and clock in every day. I got to preach on Sunday, whether I feel like it or not, whether I'm hurting or not. Pastors have to do that. Parents still have to be parents. You got to check in. You got to clock in. In a number of ways, we have forgotten to treat others the way we want to be treated. And sadly, many churches, many Christians' maturity is capped because God will not let you grow under the guise of thinking that you can do these things and there be no consequences. God cares too much about us. So I don't know. This is just reflections of what I thought about Eric Mason and him leaving. I wish him well, and I wish the church well. I don't know if he needs to be done with ministry or not. He's definitely said he was done at PIF. But I think a bigger question is like, man, where are you at for real? Like, are you, I'll just say this. Please, please, please take Psalm 19, verses 12 and 13 and pray through it. Psalm 19:13 is one of the Psalms I cry out to the Lord consistently. And it just says, keep back your servant from presumptuous sins. The only time, at least in the ESV translation, that the word presumptuous sins comes up. It says, keep back your servant from presumptuous sins. Listen, let them not have dominion over me. Presumptuous sins, you're just presuming on the grace of God. And you're giving in the sin, just expecting grace to just forgive you without any. And it says it has mastery over you. It says, let it not have dominion over me. Then he says this, then I will be innocent, right? Then I will be blameless, innocent of great transgressions. I think some of you watching right now or watching later, live or later, I think you need this verse. I think you're casual in your faith with Christ. There's presumption in your life. You're just presuming that you're just good because you attend church, made a professional. But you know what God's going to evaluate? You know what Matthew 7 should teach us when he says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom. It's not just it's like you got to make sure God knows you, not that you know God. Jesus didn't say, depart from me, you didn't know me. He said, depart from me, I never knew you. And God lays out, what does it mean for me to know you? Isaiah 66:2b. The second half is, he says, but this is the one I look, humble, contrite, and trembles at my word. Like, if that's not you, then what I would do is this. Pray Psalm 19:13 and ask the Lord and confess that to the Lord. And then take Psalm 51 and just pray through that for the next 6 months. Many of you watching believe you'll be alive for 6 months. No one thinks I may die tomorrow. Take Psalm 51 and just pray through it for like 6 months until your heart is stirred and softened to want to honor the Lord, until there's real contrition. Remember, sorrow, feeling bad for sin is not necessarily, non-Christians feel bad. Shoot, my pets can feel bad. My cat feels bad. Dogs can go, Feeling bad can be worldly sorrow. You want to feel bad because, man, I want to please the Lord. And I feel like we've just lost this. I watch COVID turn Christians into consumers even more so than before. Like it's about me and and it's just like, no, fam, it's not. When Jesus said, many will say to me on that day, Jesus has this contrast, many and the few. He said, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road. He wasn't talking about believing in me. He was talking about these are people who will believe. He said they will enter through the broad is the gate and narrow road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. That's not, I made a profession of faith, so I'm in the few. No, the few are the people who say, I'm going to deny myself, take up my cross and follow Jesus. Please do not presume that because you made a profession and you go to church and you do that's all it is. The Lord is going to look at the intentions and the motives of our hearts. And so we should look at them as well too. So I don't know what happened to Eric Mason. I wish him well, but I know this. To all people that have been church hurt, please remember that that's just a part of what it means to follow Christ. Jesus said, the word says, 2 Timothy 3:12, indeed, all who desire to live a godly life will be persecuted. The American church is the least persecuted church in redemptive history. That's why the wars became so political. Conservatives think they're being attacked by the devil. You're not being, most people aren't being attacked because you're a genuine believer. You're being attacked because you're a jerk as a believer. And there's no such things as jerks for Jesus. We got to love our enemies, man. We don't love the enemies. We love everyone except the enemies of America or enemies of the American way or whatever it is, or enemies who don't agree with it. It's a madhouse right now. And I'm rambling. I'm going to let you go. But shouts to Epiphany Church. I'll be praying, and I'm sure many of you will be. And shouts to Eric Mason. If reconciliation needs to happen with people, may it happen, and so forth. And to all my pastors, to that brotherhood, man, please be faithful. Please be faithful as best as you can. And when you're wrong, just humble yourself and admit you're wrong. But also, don't admit you're wrong if you're not. Preferences and things are not charges against an elder. And I don't think they should be held as such. And people in churches have to be careful because you haven't stood in front of the Lord yet. When people say, well, God knows my heart, you're right. But you have no idea what he's going to say to you about it. But what do I know? Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you next video. Grace and peace.